And welcome to CAN TV, and I am Andy Thayer, your host here on the Gay Liberation Network television program, and with us tonight is Joey Mogul, who's a partner with the People's Law Office, a longtime LGBTQ activist, and has been very involved in the struggle against police misconduct in the city for many years, representing people who have been attacked by the police and really have no place to turn because the authorities don't help them. Joey is also the co-author of Queer Injustice, the Criminalization of LGBT People in the United States, as well as several articles, and really quite an activist here in the city. So it's our pleasure to have Joey with us, and she's going to be telling us about, as you saw on your screen, the Reparations Ordinance. Tell us, what is the Reparations Ordinance that's currently before the Chicago City Council?
So this is an ordinance that provides a panoply of redress for the Chicago police torture survivors, and specifically the Burge torture survivors. From 1972 to 1991, Jon Burge and the detectives under his command, all white detectives, were responsible for torturing over 120 African-American men and women on Chicago's South Side at Area 2 and 3 police headquarters. And when we say the word torture, we don't do so lightly, and we're not exaggerating. People were electrically shocked on their testicles. People were suffocated with plastic bags. People had telephone books that were placed on their chest or heads that were repeatedly beaten, that inflicted severe amounts of pain, but often left no marks. And this torture occurred for this 20-year period, undeterred, unabated, and it was used to coerce confessions, and it sent scores of individuals to Illinois' prisons and 11 to Illinois' notorious death row. And the fact is, because this torture occurred by police officers, and it was condoned for decades by city officials, it was able to be covered up for decades and decades on end. And the reality was, is at the time when this torture occurred, individuals did not have the evidence, and they did not have the opportunity to sue. So now they have no ability to seek any legal recourse or financial redress whatsoever. So one component of the reparations ordinance is providing financial compensation to the Burge torture survivors themselves. They are entitled to some monetary compensation. That said, we recognize that our legal system is truly limited, and it doesn't provide all of the remedies and other provisions that should be provided as they are under international law. And that's why we've entitled this a reparations ordinance. Because in addition to financial compensation, the city, the political leaders, they owe an apology to the torture survivors, to their family members, and to the African American communities terrorized by this torture practice. We are asking that there be a community center built on the south side of Chicago for not just the Burge torture survivors and their family members, but all police brutality victims.
Well, and I think that brings up an important point, as we see with the Homan Square torture allegations, that there is plenty of evidence that this is probably not just past history, but current history. One of the things that Mayor Emanuel has tried to drive home is this whole notion that the Burge situation is something that's beyond his administration. It happened under Daley, it happened under Harold Washington, it happened under Jane Byrne, etc. And really, we've got plenty of evidence, and we've got Amnesty International, First Defense Legal Aid, and others demanding that there be open investigation, an independent investigation of what's happening at Homan Square. So this is not just past history. We still have a problem of African Americans being shot disproportionately in the city. And in fact, there's going to be an event coming up very soon regarding the shooting of a woman named Rekia Boyd that we'll get up on your screen here in just a second here. Rekia Boyd was shot last year by Chicago, an off-duty police officer, and over in the Douglas Park neighborhood. And there's going to be a rally coming up for Rekia in just a few Saturdays, Saturday, March 21st. And we encourage everyone to go out to that. She was, as I said, shot by an off-duty Chicago police officer and shot in the back of the head, apparently unarmed, and yet, of course, nothing's happened to the officer. And this city, as it was with the Chicago police tortures under the Burge area, has done nothing to get justice for people like her. While we're on the subject of announcements, I'd also just like to give a plug for a petition campaign that the Gay Liberation Network is currently doing. This is regarding James Meek's appointment to be the head of the Illinois Board of Education. For those who don't know Reverend Meeks, he has been a steadfast opponent, not just of LGBT people and every single one of our rights, not just marriage, but equal employment, equal housing, equal access to public accommodations. He's also been part of the anti-union drive in this state against public employee unions. So just go to that URL there. You can read much more about why we demand that Reverend James Meeks not be confirmed as Illinois' top educator. He's singularly ill-equipped, and the fact that he has no education credentials is just one of the reasons why he is singularly ill-equipped. But let's get back to Joey and discussion of the situation with this ordinance that you and many others have been pushing. Where do things stand in the city council? Where do the mayoral candidates stand in terms of this ordinance, Joey?
Well, so this ordinance was filed back in October of 2013. Our co-sponsors were Howard Brookins and Joe Moreno, both of whom have history fighting for the Burge torture survivors. It has now been stalled in the Finance Committee for the last year and a half.
Alderman Burke, you can blame for that, amongst others.
Yes. And at this point, this has become an election issue, and this is something that many members of the public care about. And Cook County Commissioner Chuy Garcia has come out and supported the ordinance. And the fact is, Mayor Emanuel has not. He's had numerous opportunities and numerous occasions to take a stand on this and to come out in support of the torture survivors, and he has not. He has failed to do so. And while he has acknowledged that the torture survivors are owed an apology, and he's acknowledged that the statute of limitations has expired, but that we as a city still owe them a moral obligation, he has failed to step up and take the right action.
And we're talking about real people here. I mean, just coming up on your screen, some of these pictures are some of the Burge torture survivors. And that gentleman, just as he was being booked by the city. Say a few words.
Well, that's
Joey.
Andrew Wilson, and he's actually, in fact, one of the first known torture survivors. Or Burge torture survivors. He was accused of killing 2 white Chicago police officers, and Burge and his men were responsible for arresting him and bringing him back to Area 2 Police Headquarters, where they beat him, they threw him on the ground, they kicked him, they handcuffed him across a hot radiator, and they took an electric shock box, and they repeatedly shocked him on his genitals, on his lip, on his ears, and every time they did so, he would flinch, and then he would get burned across that radiator. So in Andrew Wilson's case, unlike many others, he in fact had these physical, visible injuries all over his body, 17 in fact. And when Andrew was tortured and forced to confess and finally brought over to Cook County Jail, he was able to get treatment, and this was back in 1982. And at that time, the head of Cermak Hospital, which was the medical unit at Cook County Jail, Dr. Raba was the head of that unit, and he treated Andrew Wilson, and he in fact noted the injuries to Andrew Wilson and his allegations of electric shock. And at that time, he wrote to then the head of the Chicago Police Department, Superintendent Richard Brezak, and informed him about Andrew Wilson's physical injuries and torture allegations. And he requested that he conduct an investigation into these crimes of torture committed by Burge and his men. And what Brezak did was he didn't conduct an investigation, and instead he referred the cases to our then head of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office.
One Richard M. Daley, who, of course, did nothing. And the political establishment right across the board has truly failed these victims, because it wasn't just State's Attorney Richard M. Daley, it was his successors in the State's Attorney's Office. They basically stalled the whole issue until the statute of limitations on Burge's crimes expired.
Right.
Now we're bringing up another picture here. of one of the Burge
and
torture.
Again, Andrew Wilson.
Yeah.
But let me just say this: Daley didn't just do nothing. What he in fact did is take Andrew Wilson's tortured confession and use it against him to not only convict him, but get him the death penalty. But what he did do that was nothing was he failed to investigate Burge and the others for their crimes of torture, and he absolutely had the authority and power to do so. And so, you know, what happened in Andrew Wilson's case is that he courageously went ahead and filed his own pro se lawsuit on his behalf. And at that time, he then reached out to several lawyers, and there were lawyers from my office, the People's Law Office, who then started to represent Andrew. And in the course of that litigation, that's when our office was getting letters from an anonymous police source who's now been known as Deep Badge, who was informing the office of other individuals who were tortured by Burge.
Well, and I think one of the important things that people should remember is that this was his torture techniques, Jon Burge's, allegedly started in Vietnam when he was serving in an intelligence unit, I believe, where they used this against the Vietnamese to try and confess to things they didn't do, or to try to get them to say things, you know, name names, that sort of thing. And with America's current wars and the retinue of torture that we've seen in places like Abu Ghraib and in Guantanamo and elsewhere, these same techniques, unfortunately, as some of these people move over into law enforcement, which is a typical career change for many of these folks, as it was for Commander Jon Burge, these sort of techniques like waterboarding that we've heard about get switched over. And one of the things that's been alleged at Homan Square is the denial of access to restrooms, denial of access to food, being attached to the walls of interrogation rooms by handcuffs for many, many hours on end, sleep deprivation. These are the sort of things that are designed to break down a person and get them to falsely confess to crimes that they did not commit. And in fact, just a few years ago, in the Dunn versus City of Chicago suit, class action suit that the city ended up settling for some $16.5 million, the city, while it didn't admit to doing these things, the allegations that came up many times were these very things that are currently being alleged about Homan Square. So this is current history, folks, and not just for the people who are still serving time downstate for the false confessions that many of them gave in the Burge era, but unfortunately the false confessions that are undoubtedly coming out of places like Homan Square today.
Sure, and you know, your point's well taken. I mean, torture, you know, did not begin with Burge and it didn't end with Burge. But the fact is, until we hold those accountable and we recognize it for the wrong that it is, it will continue to keep reoccurring, which is why we believe the passage of this reparations ordinance is so essential.
Well, and many of the Burge torture victims have been activists on their own behalf. Daryl Cannon here, for example, whom I heard has speak many times and very eloquently about what happened. Say a few words about Daryl and how, in spite of the horrible trauma he went through, how he's transformed himself into an activist.
I mean, Daryl, I have to say, is one of the most eloquent and courageous speakers and activists that I know. He personally was electric shocked by Burge's two right-hand men, Peter Dignan and Jon Burge. He was electrically shocked on his genitals with a cattle prod. He was subjected to mock execution. He was forced to confess to this crime that he did not commit, and he was then sent away, and he did 24 years, including 10 years at the Tams Correctional Center, which is a supermax prison, which is torturous conditions in and of itself in terms of solitary confinement. And the fact is, Daryl has always fought on his own behalf. You know, both while he was in prison, filing his own pro se lawsuit, he's done these incredible drawings documenting the torture he went through, but also since he's been out, he has not only championed his injustice, but he's championed the injustice of all the other torture survivors, particularly those who are still behind bars. There are at least 19 Burge torture survivors who remain behind bars, who have never had an opportunity to present the wealth of evidence that has been uncovered over the last 20 years documenting this pattern and practice of torture.
Okay, we're going to take a call here.
Yeah, good evening to y'all.
Yes, hello.
You know, the media, right?
Pardon? Go ahead, sir.
Media. Okay. Now, when that's for the police cameras, right?
Well, you know, they've talked about instituting police cameras, and I know that there's a limited program with the CPD, but I think it's important to remember that cameras didn't help Eric Garner in the Staten Island attack.
What happened to him?
Mm-hmm.
And this guy
or Rodney King, for that matter.
Yeah,
well,
well, that wasn't a police camera, though, was it?
Yeah, it wasn't. But in fact, in the case of Eric Garner, they went after the one person who was arrested was the cameraman.
Right. I mean, I think the body cameras, you know, I think everyone wants them to believe that they're the panacea that's going to bring us justice. And I think your point, Andy, is well taken. They're not exactly, they don't always bring us justice. We can get it live and on tape, and we still see that racism rules the day, and people are not held accountable, and justice is not served.
Well, I'd like to just bring up an important couple of activities that Joey, in fact, has been involved in organizing here. Joey, the first one is the Reparations Ordinance up before the Chicago Finance Committee coming up on Monday. That's at 10:30 a.m. You need to be on the second floor of City Hall, which is 121 North LaSalle Street. Tell people why people should be there at that demonstration hearing on Monday.
Well, as I said, you know, this reparations ordinance has been there for over a year. We have 29 alder people who support it, so over half the city council. If it were to get a hearing today and a vote in city council, it would pass. But we are prevented from getting a hearing because the Emanuel administration has not come on board, and Chairman Burke has not called it for a hearing. So people are showing up to the Finance Committee, and they are demanding that we get a public hearing, because the public has a right to know what this ordinance is about, and they have a right to weigh in on whether it should be passed or not.
Right, and there's another important, there's the information, 10:30 a.m. Monday, City Hall, second floor. There's another important activity happening on Wednesday, which is coming up on your screen right now. Again, focusing on the reparations ordinance. And this is about, it's going to happen on the 5th floor of City Hall from noon to 5 p.m. on Wednesday. 5th floor of City Hall being, of course, right outside Richard Daley's, Rahm Emanuel's office. Tell us about what's going to be happening at that event, please,
Sure.
Joey.
Well, that's going to be a public art exhibit. It's called an exhibit in. And, you know, part of the reparations ordinance is also about documenting this history, and it's about having Chicago Public Schools teach about this history. It's about having public memorials that not only memorialize the racist torture that occurred, but also the struggle for justice, the 20-year-long struggle for justice in these cases. And so this exhibit is about highlighting parts of that reparation, because part of reparations is, again, making sure that this doesn't occur yet again. And so this exhibit will be featuring various parts of the history of the Burge torture cases. It will be featuring parts of the struggle for justice in the torture cases, as you see on the screen right now. And it's going to include particular expressions and artwork of current ongoing struggles with police violence, police torture, that are going on this day. And so it will be a full exhibit. You will have people who will show you around and discuss the history of the Burge torture cases and discuss how there have been reparations provided to other torture survivors and in other countries. And it will really explain all the different facets of the reparations ordinance and why it's necessary to be passed.
Well, and as you just saw on that last picture up on your screen there, Jon Burge was eventually found guilty. But like Al Capone, it wasn't for his main crimes, it was for lying about his crimes. He was involved in a deposition where he said, "Oh, I didn't torture." Big mistake. That starts the statute of limitations going on that crime of perjury, and that's what he was found guilty of. He served, what, a couple of years, and then spent some time in a halfway house, and then just this past month, while some of his victims are still serving years downstate, he was released, and he's collecting a city pension. And our own police department and our own fraternal order police and associated police unions supported him getting that pension. And so when you hear these jerks downstate talking about pension reform. They're not talking about taking pensions away from people like Jon Burge, who tortured people.
Right.
They're talking about taking away from genuine working people who actually earned those pensions.
But so on that note, I want to note, Burge was ultimately convicted, and that was only because there's been perpetual struggle and organizing in the streets, at City Hall, in the court of public opinion. Mm-hmm. The fact is we cannot litigate our way to justice, and that's why we really need people to come out and support us at City Hall and come join this reparations movement. It's an amazing movement. It includes a group of individuals and organizations, including Project NIA, We Charge Genocide, and a group that I work with, Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. It's a vibrant, thriving movement. If you want more information, check out www.chicagotorture.org. And I just can't impress on you, we are so close to getting this reparations ordinance passed, but we need every single person of conscience and justice to come out and support us in this movement.
And the lawyers can't do it. They do a great job, and this is probably the only time you'll hear someone say in public, an attorney say, that you can't litigate yourself to justice. We need good lawyers. We need people like Joey in the struggle, and her colleagues like Flint Taylor at the People's Law Office, who's been the dean of really the anti-police brutality movement from the attorney side. But the only reason why we got Jon Burge fired was in the wake of the Rodney King rebellion in L.A. It happened shortly after that all happened, and the city fathers were finally concerned, and they wanted to deflect after spending millions of dollars on his defense. We're going to take, I know we've got a caller here, but we're just a minute and a half away, I'm afraid, from wrapping up here, and I really do want to get information about these different activities coming up here, so I'm afraid, caller, you're going to have to tune in another time here. And we're trying to get this up on the screen. There we go. The Chicago Reparations Ordinance. We're going to bring it to the attention of the City Finance Committee, the City Council Finance Committee, whether they like it or not, during their 10:30 a.m. meeting at City Hall, 121 North LaSalle Street on the second floor. Please attend. As Joey said, we can't litigate ourselves to justice. And then, of course, a great and imaginative action happening on Wednesday, 12 noon to 5 p.m., again at City Hall, 121 North LaSalle Street on the 5th floor, this time outside of Rahm Emanuel's office. Please be there. Show your support for people who have suffered more than many of us can fathom. 5 p.m., 121 North LaSalle Street, Wednesday on the 5th floor of City Hall. And bringing it up to the present, let's demand justice for Rekia Boyd and all her sisters. Rekia was an unarmed black woman who was shot and killed by an off-duty police officer out in Douglas Park. You can join the protest a couple Saturdays from now. That's Saturday, March 21st. Please be out there. And then finally, demand that we actually have someone who's an educator for the Illinois Board of Education rather than Reverend James Meeks, a notorious anti-LGBT bigot, anti-union person who does not really support public education. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to Joey Mogul for being on our show tonight.
Thanks,
Great
Andy.
job, Joey. And with that, we're going to close out here with a few thank yous.
I want to thank Andy, who's been in this struggle long and hard for decades, and he is amazing in terms of both his activism and solidarity. So thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Joey.